Hey, just imagine that instead of saying what I'm saying now, I was talking about your business. Or perhaps you were talking about your business. You can advertise on About Basingstoke's podcast network for less than you might think. Just email info@aboutbasingstoke.com to find out more. About Basingstoke is Basingstoke's podcast network, proudly supported by IncuHive, the place to be for startups and small businesses. With virtual offices, desk space, offices and meeting rooms now open at Brunel House, Stevenson Road, Hound Mills, Basingstoke. Visit incuhive.co.uk.
Well, Jill, thank you for talking to me today. We're here to have a chat about some of the kind of things that Natural Basingstoke are doing in the area, what you as the leader of Natural Basingstoke's key concerns are and what maybe some of the opportunities are. But before we get into that, let's quickly introduce ourselves. And if you could just give us a little brief overview of who Natural Basingstoke are, that would be really useful.
Sure, thank you. Well, it's really nice to be sat in your garden doing this. It is a bit cooler, which is great.
A little bit nicer.
For those that don't know us, Natural Basingstoke is a local charity. We do all sorts of different things, but one of the things we do is advocate for nature in the borough.
Mm-hmm. I'm Jack, so also a member of Natural Basingstoke as well. What are you worried about and concerned about for nature in our borough here in Basingstoke, and what do you feel that you need to advocate for?
Yeah, our nature is already under threat in the borough, and there are significant plans over the coming years to build thousands of new homes, which is only going to increase that pressure. So there's quite a few different things that we're worried about, but I could probably pick two examples for you.
Yeah, that'd be useful.
Yeah, one of them is water. So that's a whole combination of things. Our water, most of it comes from abstraction, from underground reservoirs on chalk aquifers, if you understand what I mean. They are becoming polluted. They are essentially over-abstraction means that they're drying up. So that has all sorts of impacts. So one is, and there's been a lot that our local authority has said about this lately, that residents potentially are at risk of having issues with their water, and that we're not really prepared for the number of people that we're going to have in the future. From a biodiversity point of view, what it means is we're basically killing off our chalk streams by removing the water and poisoning them. The other thing that concerns me with all the developments coming to our area is how habitats are getting broken up. Mm-hmm. So basically many types of wildlife need large areas to roam for their normal activities. And we're taking these areas away, we're degrading these areas, we're breaking them up. And I would say all of this is already impacting on nature, and it's only going to get worse unless we do something about it.
So you're talking about the kind of the water companies, that's very much in the media at the moment. People are, I think, becoming aware of that as an issue, and it's something that we all obviously need. I think we're quite alive to it at the moment. We're filming this a week after our second heat wave in the UK so far, reaching temperatures of 35 degrees or higher. Water is an absolute necessity, but actually it's becoming harder and rarer for us to get, something we're not used to in this country either, kind of laughably. Talk about this rains all the time in the UK. I think we've probably got into a habit of taking water for granted. You're saying it's becoming more polluted as well, and those kind of bits we take for granted with water just coming out the tap, coming from places underground, are actually starting to dry up and we're overusing them. What action would you like to see taken off the back of that?
So if you're talking about water, I think it's a very complex situation, to be honest with you. One thing is the fact that action is really needed now, and this is more of a governmental issue, with the water companies to sort out years of underinvestment or decades of underinvestment. I know things are happening, but the challenge for us is they're not happening fast enough. Yeah. By the time that happens, there'll already be a queue of houses to be built, and there'll already be some in progress and damaging environment even more. The second thing is protection for our chalk streams. They are interwoven, but planning regulations don't protect our chalk streams like they do with other important habitats like ancient woodland, for example. That's something we'd like to see more. But then there are a whole series of things around conserving our, what we call the blue environment, so water environments, things that can, nature-based solutions around things like flooding. You can have things like reed beds to help with pollution, and also really giving serious consideration to where it is appropriate to develop, so that you don't develop in places that will further damage and degrade or undermine our water systems.
Yeah. So like talking about those like aquifers that you talked about, that seems like somewhere we wouldn't want to build on top of if we're dependent on those.
Definitely not. Agreed.
And we know ourselves that there's examples of planning applications on those kind of sites as well. So these sites aren't just off the table, are they? Like they are. The system allows all of these things to be considered. Correct.
I mean, these things are currently not off the table. And, I would say, and we'll probably come on to this in a minute, but we're not actually saying don't build. And we're particularly not saying don't build new homes. People need homes. But we're talking about where you build and how you build. And there are some areas where it's completely inappropriate to build because you cannot help but damage the environment. And there are also serious considerations that you need with regard to how you build. How do you build in harmony with nature?
So can you give us some examples of what you would see as like building in harmony with nature? What does that look like?
Yes, I think the obvious one is what I would call green corridors. So basically, you map your nature network. So you map your green spaces, your rivers, etc., across the borough. And you sit that alongside the local plan, which sets out where you're going to build houses. And then you look at where there are overlaps and you look at how you can build in a manner that actually doesn't split those corridors, cut them up. Also things like buffer zones, for example, where you've got an important ancient woodland, for example. You allow sufficient space for that nature to thrive. You don't build right up to the edge of it. And we've seen interesting things. Chinham was built a long time ago. I lived there when I first came to Basingstoke. There are mature oak trees with houses really close to them. Yeah, that shouldn't happen because essentially you're going to damage the trees, or indeed you're going to damage the houses. Yeah. It's not. You need to allow sufficient space around these natural features.
Yeah. I assume their roots were going to go really far under the ground, much further than like those buildings are allowing for if they're coming so close. Like you said, that's probably detrimental to the housing. And it's also detrimental to the trees at the same time. So it's finding that balance.
It is, yeah, you're right. Obviously, in a mature oak tree, you're going to have significant roots and you need to allow for that kind of a growth. And it's similar with rivers and things like that as well. You can't build right up to these rivers. You'll just end up with a reasonably sterile semi-urban environment. You'll lose all the nature that depends on them. You have to bear in mind they are natural corridors because they just wind through the landscape and they have a sort of riparian, as we call it, corridor. So along the edge of them you'll get things live, but they don't live in things that are encased in concrete or surrounded by houses.
We have dredged and built on a lot of floodplains, and those places, we're kind of seeing the ramifications of that now when we're getting much more rain in the winter. A lot more flooding events happening, but also that's the problem for those people where these houses have been built, probably don't know that their house is built in a historic floodplain and they're forever being inundated with potentially problems for where, it's that poor choice where maybe we didn't need to build there, maybe we need these spaces to do their jobs, don't they, which is to absorb water. And like I said, even more so now maybe than previously as we're getting these high water events happen in winter.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good example. I agree with you that, and it brings me on sort of nature-based solutions where there are things like sustainable urban drainage, for example, things that can be built in the natural landscape that help with those problems. So instead of you creating a problem by building somewhere where perhaps you shouldn't and building inappropriately, you build in the right places, but you think about whether what you're building can actually work in harmony with the natural environment and then protect against things like flooding or road runoff or other things, as well as providing for biodiversity and helping our wildlife.
So it's kind of getting nature to work for you, but on nature's terms. So it's a bit of a win-win. Yeah, for nature and for the people in that space as well. Yeah. I think I heard somewhere like a story related to beavers that there was a place where there was consistent flooding. I think it might be in Scotland, and they spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on this kind of man-made flood defences, and I think they finally got some beavers in. I think in a year they stopped the flooding, and like none of the man-made drainage was not even needed at all. Like all the things they'd built for like an absolute fraction of the cost. So if there's a right space for working with nature, actually it can also save us a lot of money at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's no surprise, is it? Because things evolved in harmony with one another.
Yeah.
And it's when we start to actually break those connections up that we actually undermine the nature working for us, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So you've outlined a couple of very high housing targets that have been put on us. We've got, issues, I think lots of people are aware of the issues with nature already, seeing like lots and lots of UK species, 50% of UK species at risk of extinction, but also, acute to this area, to other areas in the southeast as well, water shortage issues, risks there as well. You've outlined a couple of the problems, but specific to the Basingstoke area, Natural Basingstoke, what do we want to happen? What would you like to see happen to start moving us in the right direction on these issues in our borough?
Okay, so we commented quite extensively on the local plan recently, and there are a number of things that we've raised in that and in other discussions with the local authority. I'd probably come up with roughly 4. So one is we would like a nature recovery forum as a sort of provisional title, and that really would be a group of stakeholders across the borough which we would like to be involved in, but including the local authority, potentially developers, certainly other wildlife organisations, wildlife trust, etc., to actually work together to start to develop some of these solutions, start to identify projects that can actually help nature recovery, work out sources of funding, sources of advice, and then all collaborate really on nature recovery across the borough. I think that's a big one. I don't think that's happening at the moment. We'll come back in a minute to some things that have happened. I think the next one is something I mentioned earlier, which is our nature recovery network. So the local nature recovery strategy for Hampshire was published turn of the year, I think, and it shows a network. We commented on it, we were involved in it, and it shows a network of areas, connected habitats, I suppose, if you like, and set some aspirations out. But it's for local authorities to implement that. Yeah. And what we would like to see is that alongside the local plans map of where houses will be built, there is a map for nature recovery that is based on what's in the local nature recovery strategy, but it goes further than that because there are plenty of areas that it didn't cover. And then that acts as a sort of complementary piece of documentation for how development is planned. Yeah. So it's planned in a way that balances both of those needs, the need for housing and the need to recover nature, and actually works out how you could build in complementary ways that don't destroy nature.
And I guess like many people in the borough would expect and want local government to have a plan to tackle some of these pretty big issues. And like this is just one of the key, tools in the arsenal to deal with that. It's looking at nature-based solutions. It's looking at not making the problem worse in many spaces as well through this through the water abstraction you talked about and other problems. So that it sounds like a sensible thing to have in place. Probably an expectation for most people in the borough would expect that just to exist.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I think we hear that from other advocacy groups, other wildlife groups, but we also we spend a lot of time out with the public, so on sites doing conservation or at events. And we hear this all the time. And then there's plenty of research at national level as well that backs up the importance of nature for people. I mean, people generally love nature. Or something in the press, I wish I could remember the detail, not that long ago, about people's attitude to nature and to development. And it was actually stressing that the British public in general loves nature. Yeah. It's good for our mental health, it's good for our physical health. It's just nice to be in, as well as sort of most people who love nature appreciate its intrinsic value for its own sake. Yeah. And then I think you alluded to it's really, really important that even people who are not particularly nature fans, recognise, I think, that we don't have clean water without water sources. Yeah. And we don't have abundant food and food security without things like pollinators. All these systems are linked to one another. And if we start to break them, which we are doing quite well at the moment, we undermine that. So it's in everybody's interests. And I think, in general, it does come on popular support. Yeah. So, you talked about the forum, the network. Is there any other tangible things you'd like to see in that? We've talked about the local plan. Would there be something similar like that for nature, where we can try and would the forum's job be to try and find those spaces, or would there be some, I guess, probably other people needed to find these spaces and look for opportunities to do this kind of work? Yeah, and you've hit on an important point there, which is that there was a major call for sites for development, but what we really need to do is put out a call for sites for nature, get people to offer sites for nature recovery. It isn't easy. There are a lot of incentives to people to sell land, but actually you don't know if you don't ask. And if you give people the information on things like grants that are available, sources of funding, you may well get people to offer them up. And people might offer their own land up, but people might identify other areas that have potential where the landowner is willing to do so. So I think a call for sites for nature restoration would be a very good proactive step for a local authority to take. I'd also just like to pick up on one point you said, which is probably my last big thing. We want plenty of other things, but which is the idea that we use nature-based solutions to help with other problems as well. So this isn't just nature versus development. It's integral, because nature can help development by making sure that we avoid flooding, pollution and other things in terms of the solutions that it can provide. Yeah,
I think that's an interesting one to me, that it seems lots of times when I think about this, we've got a Venn diagram of many crises. We live in a world of polycrisis, lots going on at the same time. We can see those all racked up. Should we not always be trying to solve as many of those with one thing at the same time? It seems to me nature-based solutions, studies are already starting to back up, they stand alone as just the best option in many cases anyway. But if there's something that can solve multiple issues at the same time, we should probably be prioritising those. Where do you think the gap is in doing that? Is it just, people who are trying to solve these problems to the best of their ability don't have the knowledge and expertise? But, because it is, I imagine these things you do need some knowledge and expertise to deliver these nature-based solutions, to know to go to them. And they're used to, just going to same old contractors or other people that they've gone to before and don't know that these things exist. Is that the blocker? Or, where do you think, how do we get that on the table?
I think there are multiple blockers. I think that information is one of them. I also think that to some degree it's incentives, and it's people understanding the significance of this issue and actually thinking, all right, there's a positive benefit, I suppose, in my development of doing this. Yeah,
that makes sense. So you've outlined a couple of things we'd like to see. I think you just did mention earlier, though, that there are some progress is starting to happen. We're starting to see some movement. What does that look like? Okay, so
we've had over the last probably month, I'd say, two really important developments in Basingstoke. So the first one is on, I think it was the 19th of June, our local MP for the centre of Basingstoke, Luke Murphy, held a green round table, which was called something like Biodiversity in Basingstoke, and we partnered with him on that. And a lot of nature experts, advocates, different types of groups were invited to that to talk about the concerns specifically in Basingstoke and what we could do about them. There was a lot of, I think, good quality debate. I think there was a real understanding sort of put across to Luke, and also to our local councillors, head of cabinet attended, for example, about some of the issues. These are real issues. It's not some NIMBYs who love nature, and they're genuine problems for our borough. I think there was some good understanding. I think out of that, there will be some actions that certainly our MP takes. I think there is more to do. I'll come on to that. The other positive development is that our cabinet has really come out strongly with regard to the issues of water security. Concerns about abstraction at places like Greywell Fen, for example.
And is that one of these places where they do extract water?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. And really calling the water companies to account for previous underinvestment.
Yeah.
Because it's all very well saying we'll invest in the future, but this abstraction and pollution and all of the other problems are happening now.
Yeah.
And what we can't do is approve a series of new homes on the promise, sort of some vague promise of future infrastructure. There needs to be a plan. So I think they've followed that up strongly. I think,
and I guess on that point quickly, I guess that's based on the experience of that investment has not happened. So we haven't got a good track record with these companies either of delivery, and that money is going to shareholders and not into this. And if you talk about delivering for the future, taking away this water from us now and leaving these habitats in a worse state than when they found them is not investing for this borough's future, if we're dependent on these places for water.
No, exactly. I mean, what we're talking about at the moment is sort of almost, it's halting the degradation and new homes being built without a plan and without a top plan that is happening in sufficient time is not halting it, not reversing it, it's continuing it.
It's going to get worse.
Compounding it.
Yeah, it's going to get worse with more
Correct.
people here,
Yeah.
more housing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. In that, like, what more things that we would like to see off the back of that? You said you come back to it. What is the additional?
Okay, so I think there is not much traction or attention to the issue of what we refer to as green and blue corridors. I don't think that's currently getting any active attention from anybody. So I don't think anybody, any politicians, if you like, are taking any action to ensure that our environments are connected, that we reverse that disconnection that's happening now, that we don't make it worse by building. So I don't think that's happening.
And just to take it on that point, just to explain why that is so important. Like, why is it important? These habitats, do they need to be connected? What is the important?
So I think there's probably a couple of things. One is the whole planet functions on ecosystems, and so do local areas. Everything is connected, and if you start to disconnect one thing from another, things stop working. And the other thing is a lot of wildlife actually uses wide areas. I forget the stats, but hedgehogs move an enormous distance.
It's a couple of miles or something each night, I think.
Yeah, and animals move distances to forage for food. They move distances to breed. They move distances because they actually have different places for shelter and other other actions, like our famous toads at Cafford Lane, have a breeding pond and then an area where they hibernate. So they have a terrestrial landscape and then they have a water landscape, and these things need to be connected. People need to be able to move, creatures need to be able to move from one to another, and we are seriously damaging that in all sorts of ways.
I guess it's in a similar way to, like, if a family with small children live on one side of a really, really, really busy road, and there's no zebra crossing and their school's on the other side of the road, that's a danger, isn't it? Like, that's a real risk for them having to cross that road, or they have to go really far out their way to find somewhere safe to cross. It's just the exact same thing for nature, isn't it? That we're putting these things in the way that's making it a lot more dangerous, hard to get to these spaces that they need to get to.
I think that's a good example that people can really relate to. I'd say that the food was the other side as well. It's a very pertinent example. It basically the key things that they need to survive. Every creature needs shelter. They need the ability to find partners. They need food. They need water. And actually, these things are in different areas. And as per the example you've given for humans, they need to be able to move around, and if they can't, then they can't get things that are essential to their lives. And we have to remember that it's a bit of a pyramid here. Without flowers, we don't have pollinators. Without pollinators, we don't have the food supplies that we need. Without some of the small invertebrates, we don't have small mammals, and so on and so forth. And equally, the natural systems like the carbon and nitrogen cycles and all of those kind of things don't function without these things. And schools talk about this at a big planetary level, but this is it's the same at a small level. Small things like water systems function at more of a kind of a local scale as well.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So we've outlined there the issue of, like, why that's important. You don't think it's getting enough coverage. Like, is that something you want to see change then? That there is more, people talking about this more, including like senior, politicians, local politicians, like.
Yeah, I mean, I'd put that into two things. I am very worried at a national level to see green issues, I'll call them, just dropping down the agenda, and that just feeds all the way down. So it starts off at international level and then nationally, and it's just not getting the attention. I think that's a real problem because the issue hasn't gone away. And I really do understand that there are a lot of other things that people are worried about, the cost of living crisis, for example. And it's really hard. The old thing about alligators and draining swamps, well, it is hard to focus on issues that appear to be long-term when you're facing short-term problems. But the problem is, tomorrow there will be massive problems with water and food, and there will be massive economic problems without solutions. So that's a national level. Okay. Locally, I think that national rhetoric has sort of bled down a bit. So, we, in our own government, we hear build, baby, build, don't we? Which everybody knows annoys me immensely. And locally, there isn't enough emphasis on nature alongside planning.
Yeah.
We need new homes, and I have to say, I am not at all, I don't think Natural Basingstoke, or any of us would say we were against new homes. We're not. We're just more interested in how this is done. But it's presented at all levels as sort of binary choice between. And then the emphasis in Basingstoke has been on, because we don't have a local plan that meets the housing allocation from central government, emphasis is on getting stuff built. And I think it's a false dichotomy, because most people who are advocates for nature are not NIMBYs. They're not saying don't build. They're saying we can't keep just approving things on an ad hoc basis without a proper strategic solution. And that's what I feel is missing. So there's lots of lovely things, locally. There's the biodiversity strategy, for example. The climate and ecological emergencies declared by our council. But there's an absence of any strategic conversation or solution for what we actually do about nature recovery. And that's where all those things like having a forum call for sites, having a proper plan of green spaces, and then working in harmony with organisations to develop the solutions and build in harmony with nature. That's where all that comes in. It's all missing. There's a big gap. At national level, we've got the house building targets, but there's things like the environmental improvement plan and the water white paper, all say great things, but they rely on local authorities to implement them, and then local authorities feel under so much pressure to build homes that overrides everything else. And so we need a plan.
I think that's, again, I'm going back to that point, that I would imagine people would expect that plan to be in place and probably be quite shocked to find that really isn't the case, that there's these documents there that people can go and read and look at, but it's not really always turning up into like deliverable action on the ground all the time, because of all these other competing things and the pressure to do one of those things when there's multiple things that need to be looked at the same time. Instead of, if there's a plan, like going back to that, like multiple crises, you can look at how you can solve some of these things and address multiple issues at the same time. If there's a plan, really hard to do that if you're ad hoc, dealing with one thing at a time and not looking at the other things that you've got to do.
Yeah, and I think there can be too much emphasis on plans as in a piece of paper. There's lots of, I always said about the local nature recovery strategy, it's a great document, but it was in danger of being what I called shelfware. So you have these plans, it sits on the shelf and looks pretty and doesn't do anything. Plans need to be practical, action orientated, and backed up by physical things that people do, which is why we're calling for this forum and actions to come up with projects. And it requires everybody to be creative. We're not waltzing in and saying we've got all the answers. We talk to lots of national organisations like the Wildlife Trust, for example, and the Rivers Trust and so on, and we get information and assistance from these people. But it needs everybody. It's like it takes a village to bring up a child. It takes an entire community to get the solution right for this kind of thing. Yeah,
definitely. And like targeted to this borough and appropriate to the area that we live in as well.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think we've outlined some of the, some of the issues, some of the potential, the roadmap towards coming up with those solutions. What can people do to help with this? How can they either, highlight this as an issue or help Natural Basingstoke or other groups that are trying to implement solutions to these things that are going to affect all of us?
So I think there's so many things, and it's I could come up with a list, and they go almost from the macro to the micro. So at the very top, I don't know if anybody came to our audience for this, came to the National Emergency Briefing. So that was a screening of a film that has been put together by a group of eminent scientists that actually calls on the government to take action for climate and nature. And we screened it in partnership with Greener Basingstoke. We do some more screenings. That's really important at high level, because it basically encourages people to write to their MPs, write to their councillors, and demand a televised briefing, almost like a war briefing. We need to do something now before it's too late. Hot it was, last week, and then a couple of weeks ago, and will be again soon.
It's 30 degrees again next week.
I was alive in the 1976, and it was the so-called hot summer. It was hot, but it was nothing like this.
Yeah, that was interesting as well. I saw the Greenpeace put a heat map out of and you saw that tiny little red bubble just over the UK in like one other place, and then you saw it now, and just everywhere is red.
Shocking.
Yeah, it was quite shocking to see that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the high level thing. Go into one of these national emergency briefings, check it out online, and join the call to have a national debate. That's a really high level. At our own level, I would call on people to support us and work with us and lobby councillors to make sure we have a strategic approach like I've just described in the borough. Not what we've already got. There are big gaps, there's a gulf between where we are currently and where we should be to take advantage of some of the environmental guidance, etc., etc. So that's a sort of middle ground thing. And then at a very low level, there are things people can do themselves. Putting a pond in the garden. Your garden is really lovely for nature, by the way, and it's a great example of what you can do in an urban garden. Doing things themselves. I've done that. My garden is a bit of a wasteland. I've got swish boxes, I've got a little mini pond and various other bits and pieces that I'm now starting to put in. So there are things you can do personally because it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this. I think my biggest thing is I just call on, I'm really pleased to see MPs and councillors engage with this, but I feel like what we've done so far is the beginning.
Yeah, we started to talk about what the solution might look like.
Yeah, and it's a partial picture. I mean, it's a bit like a jigsaw with a couple of pieces in it, but some large pieces that are missing, and we need to make sure that we build on this. I feel like we're almost at a bit of a fork in the road, right? And we can either carry on and damage our environment, possibly irreparably, or we can, with political leadership and community engagement, we can pull together now to come up with solutions that make a difference forever. And future generations, future wildlife, if it could talk, will thank us for this, rather than being desperate in our area through shortages of water, through lack of green space, depressing aspects of that, destruction of nature. It would be nice to see that we went down Route A.
That path, and you're like rowing a boat down, you've got this lovely path going off towards a beautiful rainbow and a castle, and we've got the kind of horrible haunted wood on the other side. Feels like we're going down that way at the moment. We need to veer off towards the nicer path with a bit more nature for us all. Bro, well, thank you, Joe. I think that's really helped me understand this issue a bit more. If people do want to get in touch with us, you can get us on our Facebook and Instagram at Natural Basingstoke, and you can also email us at admin@naturalbasingstoke.org.uk.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hey, just imagine that instead of saying what I'm saying now, I was talking about your business. Or perhaps you were talking about your business. You can advertise on About Basingstoke's podcast network for less than you might think. Just email info@aboutbasingstoke.com to find out more.